Work with anxious concern to achieve your salvation. It is God who in his good will toward you begets in you any measure of desire or achievement. In everything you do, act without grumbling or arguing. Prove yourselves innocent and straightforward, children of God without reproach. You can sit down. Work with anxious concern to achieve your salvation. This is something that Catholics sometimes get leveled against us, that we think that we have to work we have to work for our own salvation. We have to earn our salvation. And that's what we think we're doing by doing all the good works that we do during Lent and during our whole Christian lives, acting kindly towards our neighbors, serving those in need, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, all of those things, that we as Catholics think that if we're good enough, God will let us into heaven. And verses like this, seem to support that idea. Work with anxious concern to achieve your salvation. But Paul is quick to follow that up with, it is God who in his good will towards you begets in you any measure of desire or achievement. Because you see, it's not true that the Catholic Church teaches that we have to earn our salvation through our good works. The Catholic Church teaches that we are saved only by God's grace, and that faith in God is a necessary requirement for our salvation, but the Church does teach that our works are an important part of this, that we have to, by doing good, cooperate with God's grace in us. And it's this cooperation that is key, because what is our salvation? It's not just that we get to go to heaven if we're good enough, like heaven is some kind of a magical place where there's no pain and no suffering and all of our dreams are fulfilled, and we get to go into that magical place if we meet the requirements, if we jump through the right hoops. That's how we think of heaven sometimes. But heaven is not that. It is a place where there's no sorrow, no pain, and no suffering. It is a place where all of our dreams and all of our longings are fulfilled. But the reason why it's those things is because what heaven chiefly is it's a relationship with God. It's that union that we have in God. And that's why it requires our cooperation, because the union that God is calling us to is a union of love, and love requires cooperation. God, for his part, has extended his love to us, and that has to come first, because we on our own power as little created human beings, we can never reach beyond this creation into that eternity where God dwells. But God, the Almighty, who is the author of creation, he can reach beyond that veil. He can enter into creation and reach down for us, and he did. He did in Christ Jesus. And he invites us then to follow Christ back into heaven, to be united perfectly with him for all eternity. That's what our salvation consists of. And it's that relationship of love that requires us to cooperate with what God is trying to do for us. Because God's not going to force us to be with him if we don't want that. That's not how love works. Love doesn't force itself on anyone. Love invites, love asks, love encourages. And so God invites us to come to him today, during the season of Lent, all of our lives. He asks us, come be with me. He longs to be with us more than we long to be with him. And he encourages, and he gives us every grace and every power that we need to make that happen, if we want to make that happen. So it's truly God who, in his goodwill towards us, begets in us any measure of desire or achievement, as St. Paul says. And now it's our turn then to work with concern. With concern. Anxious concern, not anxious in the sense that we might use the word anxious today, like, oh, I have anxiety about this big exam coming up. But anxious in the sense that this ought to be our number one concern in life. Am I cooperating with God's will? Am I loving God with all of my heart, all of my soul, all of my being? Am I loving my neighbor as myself, as God commands me to? Because my neighbor is made in the image of God, whom I love. This is why St. Paul says we should act without grumbling and arguing. We should prove ourselves innocent and straightforward, because then we'll be recognized as children of God, beyond reproach. Children of God, not because we deserve to be called that, but because that's what God has made us. That's what God has made us, his children, whom he is inviting into this loving and free relationship with him. That's heaven. That's heaven. Let us, with God's grace, work towards that goal today.